And we'll start with roll call, please.
Teresa Taylor.
Here?
Priya Mathur.
Here.
Margaret Brown.
Here.
Matthew Seha for John Chung. Here. Rob Beckner. Dana Hollinger. Here. Ramon Rubalcava.
Here.
Okay. So I want to note that Henry Jones has joined us. Danny Brown for Richard Gillihan has joined us. Alan LaFaso for Controller Yee. And Bill Slayton has joined us. Did I miss David? Oh, David's down here. David Miller. He was hiding from me. All right, so our next order of business is the election of the board governance chair and vice chair. And I'd like to entertain the nomination for the board governance committee chair. Certainly. Okay, Ramon?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Chair. I'd like to nominate Paramar for chair.
Okay, so I have the nomination of Priya Mathur for chair of the board governance committee. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Okay, seeing no other nominations, Ms. Mathur is nominated by acclamation. Let this be a motion to have her nominated by acclamation.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded by Ms. Hollinger. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, motion carries. And here we go.
Yes, before the,
We're doing vice
let's do the
chair.
vice chair and then we'll. Is that okay? Thank you. Thanks, Teresa. No problem. Thank you very much. I will now entertain a motion to nominate for nominations. Sorry, I will now entertain nominations for the position of Vice Chair of the Board Governance Committee.
I'm awake.
Ms. Taylor.
Yes, I'd like to nominate Ms. Hollinger for vice chair of the board governance committee.
The name of Ms. Hollinger has been entered into nomination for the Vice Chair of the Board Governance Committee. Are there any other nominations at this time? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to elect Ms. Hollinger by acclamation. Moved by Mr. Fechner, seconded by Mr. Rubalcava. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Congratulations, Ms. Hollinger. We will take a 5-minute recess to shift things around a little bit. The next order of business is the executive report. Mr. Jacobs.
Very good. Good afternoon, Chair Mather and Vice Chair Hollinger and board members, our committee members. Welcome to the highlight of Board Week. We have 4 substantive matters before you today. Item number 6 is an action item whether to revise the board governance policy to add procedures that were discussed and adopted in principle by the committee at our last committee meeting in December. Item 7, which is whether to revise the board governance policy to make clear that CalPERS' policy on harassment and discrimination applies to the board and its members as well, also an action item. Item 8, which is a proposal to discontinue automatically transcribing all board and committee meetings. That is also an action item. And then item 9, which is a discussion item on whether to require what's known as the views expressed disclaimer when board members speak at conferences, constituent meetings, and the like. So with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to agenda item number 4, action consent items, approval of the December 18, 2017 Board Governance Committee minutes and the review of the Board Governance Committee delegation. What's the pleasure? Moved by Taylor. Any second?
Second.
Seconded by Hollinger. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion. Please note Mr. Rubalcava's abstention.
I'm abstaining.
And Ms. Brown's abstention as well. Motion passes. That brings agenda item 5. I've had no requests to pull anything off agenda item 5, so that'll bring us to agenda item number 6, revisions to board governance policy regarding meeting procedures. Mr. Jacobs.
All right. Brief history on this matter. In July of 2017, at the board offsite, we heard from a parliamentarian who went through Robert's rules and other parliamentary procedures. Part of his presentation was on suggestions regarding meeting procedures and how meetings could be run more efficiently and effectively. We brought those back to the specific suggestions of the parliamentarian back to the committee in December and discussed them. Though I think we had 5 or 6 of them identified. The board, the committee adopted 3 of them, put the other 2 on the parking lot. And so we're now bringing forward language, proposed language, to add those 3 that the board chose to adopt to the governance policy to formalize that adoption. One note with respect to the timed agenda proposal, I just wanted to make clear that the time periods in that that would be part of those timed agendas would be estimates, and they would be freely variable by the committee chair or the board president, as the case may be. So it would not preclude either extending or decreasing the amount of time spent on any particular item.
Thank you. So we have these policy changes before you. Any discussion from the committee? Mr. Slayton.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I think all of these are reasonable. You know, it comes to meeting management and trying to be efficient in what we do, and particularly the timed agenda. It just sets an area of expectation so we all can try to take care of the business at hand in a reasonable amount of time. I think not only the chair has the ability to modify that, but the committee does as well. Can do it by motion as well, can extend times. And I think it's really effective to say, well, we've spent 10 minutes on this item. Do we want to spend more time? And then the group can decide, or the chair can decide, we're going to allocate more time to the particular item. So I think it's just good meeting management. I think there is, I would suggest to the committee and the chair, in addition to these things, I think that it's probably a good time to direct staff maybe to bring back for a future committee to discuss all of the items in the governance that might not have a procedure or a kind of a roadmap for how we actually do certain things. There's a lot of things talked about, but then there's no process or procedure in there. And so I think there's room for improvement in that. In particular, I think because we have 3 new board members, the whole process of agenda setting and how an individual board member who wants to put something on a meeting agenda, how do they do that? And what are the kind of the rules of the road so we can all operate from the same basis. So I would make those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good suggestion, that we review the governance policy broadly to identify any policies where there is not an underlying process or procedure to support it. And so I would direct that to the staff.
Very well.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering how these changes impact what happened with the investment committee on yesterday, with the fact that we had 30 to 40 speakers here about an investment committee item about gun retailers and gun violence. I know everyone on the investment committee spoke, and then I think we spoke again, and then a lot of us felt like we had to say something, like, because we were going to vote no, but we wanted to make sure we explained how we felt about gun violence. But again, we all sort of said the same thing. But is there going to be any limit on the speakers? I mean, if everybody gets 3 minutes and there's 40 or 30, it's 90 minutes, 120 minutes. So I just want to make sure this policy does not keep speakers from speaking for their 3 minutes or potentially even 5 minutes if that's necessary.
Well, this would not affect the policy it's actually a regulation on time limits. And that regulation says that the standard is 3 minutes, but it's up to the board president or the committee chair, as the case may be, to either extend or decrease those times in any given case. So this doesn't touch that.
My concern to follow up is that when you have time limits for the board members, I've seen it go, then the next step is time limits for the speakers, where you say we will only have 20 minutes of speakers.
No, we would not cut off public comment if there were members of the public who still wished to comment. This does not require or even suggest that should be cut off.
Well, yeah, and if the suggestion is that we would prevent people from speaking, we wouldn't be permitted to do that anyway.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Ms. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make sure, I think I've probably asked this before, the adoption of the practice to ensure that all board members have had a chance to speak before calling on a board member who has already spoken. So that works for committee of the whole or the Board of Administration as a whole, but on committees such as this one where we have folks that are sitting in on the committee, are we still going by the standard then that we let those on the committee speak first? And is it one time speak first and then we can have our guests of the committee speak, or should we redefine that maybe? I didn't think of that earlier.
I think that is the implication, that each board member would have an opportunity to speak once before any board member, whether or not they're on the committee, would have a chance to speak again.
Okay. So
That's
for
what this
example,
says. If you want something different, we could consider that.
I think the only thing I was concerned with is we were letting board members or committee members speak, and then if we had, say, Danny or Henry waiting, and a board member wanted to speak again, we were letting them speak
committee
again
member.
before Danny or Henry could talk. You know what I mean? So I don't know if we need to clarify that, or if we're saying that, oh, they only get one time to speak, is that what this means? And then we can call on non-committee members?
That's what this says. But, yeah, that's what this says. And it doesn't speak to, I think that has been a practice that some chairs have used, but it hasn't been a policy that we've had. letting committee members speak before visiting board members speak. That could be a policy, or it could still remain practice, be up at the discretion of the chair. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
I was just making sure that that was addressed. So, I mean, if we don't, you're saying that it's addressed in this, and I'm feeling like maybe it's not. So maybe
No,
we
I'm
wanna-
saying that what this says is that each member of the board, any member of the board, so it's a member of the committee or a member of the board, gets to speak once before any board member gets to speak a second time, whether the board member is on the committee or not on the committee. If you think it should be some other way, you could propose alternative language.
No. I just, it's not clear in this, because it doesn't talk about committee versus non-committee members.
Right, it doesn't. It just says each member of the board has an opportunity to speak on an item before any member of the board is called.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So it does not matter because it's saying member of the board?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I wanted to make sure of. That was all. And then the timed agenda, I wanted to reiterate that our guest speakers have as much, they're 3 minutes, and if we have 50, we're going to continue to allow 50 to speak. And that's codified in our regulations and not,
That's correct.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Miller.
First, to Ms. Taylor's point, as a kind of a guest to this committee, I actually think it would be not just reasonable, but actually helpful to me to hear what all the committee members think before I weigh in on something. So I would have no problem with the priority fundamentally being for the committee members to have their say before the microphone comes to me. But what I wanted to comment on is, as a verbose person, I tend to bristle at timed agendas. But in this case, I think the reassurance that this is an estimate that helps us plan to help let all of our stakeholders, especially those who are taking time out of their day to come here, to have a little better idea when we will actually be coming out, especially like closed sessions, and being able to, have a little better sense, and kind of instigating some discipline on our part to sit down and really think about how much discussion will this take, how much timing will we need to plan, knowing that we may have the need for some flexibility, and finally, just the understanding that, there will be times that we'll need a little more time, and the reassurance that we won't let this become sort of an artificial or a limit, as someone said. It's not a limit, and that there could be motions to extend discussion, but I think more importantly, there could be motions to let's end discussion, tell Miller to shut up now, and let's move on.
I think it is meant to be a guide, and to help us as a board and as committees have discipline around being thoughtful about what we, how much time we take when we're making our comments. Not that if you have a comment that you think is really important to get out there, it shouldn't be said. Of course, it should be. But it's a guide. It's not a rigid restriction.
Right. That's the idea.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for letting me as a non-committee member speak.
You're very welcome.
I think by practice what Dave referred to has been the case with some of the committees, because I've known some chairs to say, well, I want to hear from all of the committee members first, and then they give the other sitting board members an opportunity to speak. So I think that's pretty good practice.
So are you suggesting that we enshrine that practice in this policy?
Yes.
Okay. So what we could do on item 6, attachment 1.5D, is we could say ensuring that each member of the committee has an opportunity to speak first, followed by the remaining members of the board, before calling on any additional board member who has already spoken. Something along those lines. Would that address? I don't want to just draft it on the fly, but it seems like a simple thing to articulate.
Right. Why don't I, just so we don't draft it on the fly and end up with problems,
Right.
why don't we draft that up, bring it back as a consent item, so
Okay.
that If everybody's good with the language, we just go, but if not, we can discuss it further.
Okay, so this is still an action item. We still have a couple of members who wish to speak. This is still an action item. We could approve this today with the proviso that we want this additional language about committee members speaking before other board members speak, and then bring that back as a consent item if this item passes.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Slayton?
Let's see, now I've been talking my second time, but we haven't passed this yet, so you haven't passed it. So I just thought you may want to, the committee may want to consider, the only difference between committee members and the rest of us sitting, Mr. Miller on that side and the rest of us on this side, is that we do not cast a vote. But if we attend the meeting because we want to hear the conversation and be able to address the issues. I think the only problem with having committee members only and then the rest be able to talk is it can artificially interrupt the flow of the conversation, because if someone who's on the committee says something and Mr. Jones has a thought about that, then it just creates a better flow of continuity in the conversation. So I think to artificially do that as a rule, I think we're better served by just going in the order. And then, of course, the vote is only by committee members if there's a motion. Thank you.
Ms. Hollinger?
Okay, I would like to make a motion to approve the revisions to the board governance policy regarding meeting procedures with the exception of 5D.
Second.
Motion was made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Might I suggest that we would include 5D, but with the proviso that it will come back with additional language around the committees?
Sure.
If that's acceptable to you as the maker of the motion?
Yes. Okay, so please.
Brown, second.
Okay, second, please amend it that 5D will be amended.
That's fine. Why don't I bring this back at our next meeting before bringing the changes that you've just approved to the board, so that we're not doing this kind of piecemeal.
Oh, piecemeal?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Is that okay?
That sounds,
Yeah.
Okay.
So then would we still make a motion today?
We would make the motion
still
today that
pass
you
it.
just made, but we wouldn't take it for approval
the
by the
board.
board tomorrow.
Okay.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
We'll take it after we get the language ironed
Cleaned up.
out on 5D.
That's a fine suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Okay, any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Oh, I'm so sorry. We had two members of the public who wish to speak on this item, so forgive me. Mr. Lin and Mr. Behrens, if you still wish to speak, I apologize for moving to the motion. It will still come back before the board. Sorry about that.
That's okay. You somebody else coming down? Yes, George. I'll wait for George to get here. Go ahead.
If you would like to proceed, Mr. Behrens.
Okay. So congratulations, Madam Chair and Co-Chair, and thank you, committee, for letting me speak on this issue. It seems ironic to me that last week we were celebrating Sunshine Week and transparency and everything was wonderful. And I look at this, these 3 bullet points here, and it seems like it stifles the board's ability to do what the second bullet said, and that is diversity of thought. If board members, I see you all now with your screens in front of you with a little 3-minute clock on it, and Rob keeping the time, and he will hold you to that 3 minutes, I guarantee you that. If you only have 3 minutes to speak on an important issue, that might not be enough time to get your point across. If you have to wait until all the board members have spoken before you can speak again, and if I'm the chair and I've got the majority vote on that issue, that's going to be the end of that discussion. So now your timed agenda becomes your enemy instead of your friend. I really would like you to give some consideration to not passing language that will stifle this board from being able to have a diversity of thought, to disagree, because I think that's a healthy board and I think that's a smart board, and that will give us stakeholders an opportunity to listen to both sides of an issue as opposed to just a 3-minute issue. So I really encourage you, I know you've already voted on this, but I really encourage you tomorrow when the full board meets to reconsider whether or not this is the direction you want to go. I think that it really holds the board back in being able to discuss issues, and it puts a lot of power in the person in charge of the board in whether or not after 15 minutes, if that's what it says the agenda item is 15 minutes long, they want to call it after 15 minutes, even though the discussion really wasn't over yet. I think that can tie your hands, and I don't think that's the kind of pressure you want to put on the person in charge of the board. So again, I would, tomorrow at your board meeting, I would hope that you will have more discussion about this and talk about the kinds of issues associated with time limiting the board members and giving them an opportunity to speak more than once. Thank you.
Let me just clarify that there is nothing implied in this policy that would limit a board member to speaking to only 3 minutes. There's no lit embedded here.
I appreciate what you're saying, but I've been around here for a few years, and once the door is open, it scares me as a stakeholder that the board is not going to have the flexibility that I think you all should have in order to discuss and discuss issues related to stakeholders and the outcome for the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Behrens. Mr. Lin.
Well, congratulations to Ms. Mather and Ms. Hollinger on your election to your respective positions on this committee. And committee members, my name is Jorge Lin. I'm the president of the Retired Public Employees Association. In addition to that responsibility over the years, at my 77 years, I've sat on many boards, including I still sit on a national board of directors for a particular organization. We have never taken into account that we need to set time, because that, and Tim stole my word, that stifles the opportunity for board members to completely vet an issue so that they can make an informed decision. That's what your responsibilities are, is to sit there and discuss, learn from staff, discuss, and not be stifled by time, because we all know that if a clock is ticking, whether it is ticking there or whether it's ticking here, we're going to have a situation where the chair of the committee will decide that maybe it's time to kind of close things down. And that can be done in a number of ways. It doesn't have to be rude and say, okay, that's all the conversation we're going to have, but just by virtue of how people interact, we could restrict the time. I think that, board members are elected to represent, in this particular case, we the members. And I think it's important that they have as much time to find out what they need to know to make an informed decision to vote. And frankly, we already have the bare bones of a schedule that's put out every board meeting for the agendas. And, let's look at pension and health. We certainly didn't do pension and health according to the schedule. But I think that every attempt is already made to kind of identify what the schedule will be. And so to go into this straitjacket kind of approach, I think is not in the best interest of the board members making an informed decision.
Thank you for your comments. 2 members of the board wish to speak. Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now that I've heard the speakers, I believe I would like to change my vote, and I think our vote was premature, so I don't know how we do that now after the fact, but maybe you can fix that out.
You could make a motion for reconsideration, if you'd like. Since you're on the prevailing side, you can make a motion for reconsideration.
Oh, and a majority of us have to agree to do that? Okay, I'll make a motion for reconsideration so I can vote no.
Is there a second to the motion? Hearing none, excuse me, motion fails for lack of a second. Mr. Slayton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think there's, it's legitimate concern that we would not have enough dialogue and conversation on the item. Now, my understanding is we already have timed agendas that are estimates that are given to the committee chair and vice chair, and I think it goes to the entire committee. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what's the difference between that and what we're now, if we put this into policy, what's the difference between them?
Well,
You just announce it, in other words, everybody else has a copy of it.
Everybody else has a copy.
Okay. So we've had timed agendas for years that we each have, and it's a guidepost.
Well, I think the idea that was put forward by the parliamentarian was at the beginning of each meeting, whether it be a committee or the board, you or the chair state, okay, here's the estimate of times, here's our timed agenda, and I would like to take a vote on that. And then you get board members weighing in on whether those times are appropriate. And then you adopt it formally, and then you move on, and then and then you proceed basically as the way I said at the outset, which was you try and stick to those limits, but sometimes you're going to be shorter and sometimes you're going to be longer.
So the chair has the ability to extend and continue the conversation, but also, correct me if I'm wrong, the committee also has that power.
Yes.
To say, we're not finished yet. So you can't have a chair kind of railroading through a short time if the committee still wants to have a conversation. That's correct?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm kind of where after hearing the speakers have a different attitude. I know I can't vote today, but I will ultimately have a vote. And I listened to Bill's comment. I think maybe we have enough already. You know, it's time on here, and it's still going to be at the discretion of the chair. If you come up with a policy that says 10 minutes versus a sheet that's outlining as a guide for 10 minutes, the chair still has the authority to extend or cut it off. So perhaps if the parliamentarian was focusing on some of us as chairs not being efficient, maybe we need to just train the chairs. And rather than trying to set policy for something that would probably go out the window anyway.
Well, I think chair training is something we have done in the past and something we should probably do again. So I'll take that suggestion on board, and we will look into, that will be the direction that we will look into developing a chair training. Thank you for that suggestion. Okay, that brings us to agenda item 7, which is revisions to board governance policy regarding harassment, discrimination, and retaliation policy.
Yes, and just to set the stage, the committee asked for language at our last meeting in December to make explicit that board members must abide by CalPERS's harassment and discrimination policy. And so this is, we've come forward with some proposed language to do that, which is at page 21 of 25 in attachment 1. And it's to the committee for discussion.
This is also an action item.
I'll move approval.
Motion's been made by Ms. Brown, seconded by Ms. Taylor. Any discussion on the motion? Well, I have something I would like to suggest, and I think this is a very good first step and certainly embodies the CalPERS-wide policy. I think that unlike our employees, where there's a civil service process that if an accusation or claim is made against an employee, we don't have a similar process for the board. And I do think enshrining a process for investigation, determination, and censure of a board member who is deemed to have where a claim is made, I think that would be helpful, and I think it's something we should review. I know, I'm not sure how widespread such policies are for bodies such as CalPERS or legislative bodies, but I think it might be worth some research around and then bringing back options to this committee. So that's my suggestion, Ms. Hollinger.
Yeah, I agree, because the one, while I would agree to approve this language, the one thing that I'm not seeing are repercussions. Are we not allowed to have that, or do we
Well-
not have the authority?
There's already provision that pertains to discipline of board members for violating the board governance policy.
Oh, I see, as a policy, as the board governance policy as a whole.
Right.
Got it. Oh, okay. Okay.
Mr. Ceja.
I was actually going to, thank you. I was actually going to ask or follow up with the same question that Dana had, but are there particular changes that are needed in order to remove a member now?
There's no provision for removing a member.
Okay. Thank you.
So.
Just to be clear, you mean removing a member from the board?
Yes.
Yeah, there's no provision for that.
So I have made a suggestion. I'm not hearing a resounding desire from this committee to move forward with something more, to do more research on this. Is that, am I the lone? Ms. Hollinger?
I agree. I would like, if I were going to elaborate, I would want to know two things. I would want to see maybe we need to change our policy to have different repercussions today based on what we're seeing going on, with Weinstein, and with different boards now, because times have changed. And so whether our governance policy is current in terms of its the consequences or the so yeah, I would like to see some options. And also if that disqualifies you.
Disqualifies.
Well, I have to think about it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Mather. So I want to clarify. Are we talking about research into what similar governing bodies have done around this issue?
Yes, and what could be done?
And what could be done?
And bring back some options, some common sense options about what we could incorporate.
In terms of enforcement?
In terms of, well, of process.
Process and
perhaps,
enforcement.
Around a claim can be made, but how do you determine whether, to come to a determination about that claim?
Gotcha.
And then, once a determination is made.
No, I agree. I think we do need that because we don't know. We do know that with elected members, just like the legislature, I think it's peer pressure that ends up, or not even peer pressure, but public pressure that ends up having those elected members step down. So, because they're elected, so I don't know what our recourse would be on elected members or appointed members, but I would love to see what similar governing bodies have in place, and ultimately it's completely different than state of California as a state employee. There are several levels of discipline that goes under. So.
Okay, well, I think then that will be the direction that we will do a little bit more research into this topic and how elected boards or boards such as CalPERS might handle these types of cases, claims that are made against board members in this regard. But meanwhile, sorry, Mr. LaFaso?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on the same subject, just to educate us a little bit, Mr. Jacobs. So there's got to be some external process where, say, if a board member engaged in conduct which was deemed sexually harassing toward, say, for example, a member of the CalPERS staff, Is there any existing legal exposure through any existing process, like, say, the Department of Fair Employment Housing? And does this policy, even as it is, create some additional legal exposure to a board member because now there's some explicit thing that one can be deemed to have violated? I realize, of course, all of this assumes that CalPERS staff member in my hypothetical feels comfortable bringing that matter forward, knows who to tell, all that kind of stuff. But can you just draw me a picture, if you have a clean answer, as to sort of what the exposure is now, given that, sexual harassment's a pretty serious offense?
Well, if your question is, does the proposed language alter the potential liability, then the answer is no, because board members are already subject to the state of California's rules, regulations, policies, laws, et cetera, regarding sexual harassment. The question about enforcement really depends upon what type of board member you are. So for you, for example, Mr. LaFaso, you're a California state employee, you'd be subject to the rules of your agency and the SPB and the like. Mr. Slayton, however, not an employee of the state of California, would be subject presumably to the procedures at SMUD that pertain to employees and board members of SMUD, since he sits on the SMUD board, but would not currently be under any jurisdiction of any administrative agency of the state, except insofar as DFEH can proceed against non-state actors.
So I understand the bottom line is that unless you're a state employee, there's really no practical enforcement process.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think the direction is clear?
Yes, I have one question for you, though,
Yes.
which is, we have some proposed language here. Do you want to adopt this today with the idea that we'll come back to try to add something or provide
Yes.
you, or do you want to just hold off and we'll do it all when we come back?
I think we should adopt it today, that's my view, and then come back with enhanced language. It might take us a little time to do the research and consider, and I think this is something we should have embedded in our governance policy. Ms. Brown.
So that was my motion, so I
Yes.
will amend my motion. I just want to be sure that we do the research and see maybe what other boards are doing around the state. Maybe CalSTRS, take a look at our sister across the river here, and see what they're doing, so we don't have you reinvent the wheel. We just borrow it from somebody else. Thank you.
No, it's a good idea. It's really hard to reinvent this wheel. I've tried to do it before, but okay.
All right, so the motion before you is to adopt the language as written. I have given separate direction to do some more research, and I see no further requests from the committee or board to speak. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. That brings us to agenda item number 8, which is proposal to discontinue transcription of board and committee meetings. Mr. Jacobs.
Yes. So this is an item that's for committee discussion and decision, but let me set the stage. Several years ago, CalPERS started videotaping and live streaming its meetings, and also it had closed captioning, or it still has closed captioning. It also maintains those videos on the CalPERS YouTube channel. When we made that change, when CalPERS made that change, was probably the time to be having this discussion, but we didn't, so here we are today. We do now have multiple ways to go back and look at past board meetings. We audio tape all meetings. We video and live stream all open session meetings except a couple of off-site sessions. We do also provide simultaneous closed caption transcripts, which we preserve, and that is a different contract from the one that we are talking about today. and that would continue in place. So some would contend that video is actually the best record of what happened because it captures things like facial expressions, tones of voice, and inflection that you don't get with a dry piece of paper, a dry transcript. So we have a pretty transparent way, a pretty transparent record of prior meetings. So the question for the committee, or one way to look at it anyway, is whether it is a reasonable administrative expense to continue automatically transcribing all meetings. As it laid out in the agenda item, it would not preclude CalPERS from going back and transcribing previous meetings or ordering a court reporter for a future meeting. And on that note, we understand, I understand from Mr. Pacheco that media primarily use the closed caption transcript to write their stories. And as I said, that is not going away. We did hear originally, or soon after the agenda item was uploaded from Bloomberg, that they were concerned about it, but they changed their position when they found out that we were not dispensing with the closed caption transcripts. And if you look to the current court model, it almost always requires that the parties who want the transcript pay for the transcriptions. So the question, or a way of bringing forward the question is, who should pay? Should CalPERS pay for it when there are already various ways of going back and seeing what happened that we preserve? Or should the person who wants the transcript, the requester of the transcript, pay for that transcription? So with that, I'll turn it over to the committee for discussion.
And just to clarify, the closed caption transcripts are written transcripts.
Correct.
So they are available, as I understand it, they're available immediately, whereas the other transcriptions are available 2 weeks hence.
Correct, yeah, they're simultaneous. Pretty
Thank you.
amazing, actually.
Ms. Taylor.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question. I did not know that. So the closed caption transcripts are available immediately thereafter?
They're simultaneous.
Oh, they're simultaneous. And they're separate from the video. So the closed captions can be, or at least the video closed caption can be sent out as if it were a transcript.
The closed caption transcript?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. My other question was, and I had this question before, I just want to make sure.
Just a moment, Mr. Pacheco is coming up to clarify.
Uh-oh.
I don't think so. I think it comes out. Yeah. And we send it out. No. Yeah.
Brad Pacheco, CalPERS team. Ms. Taylor, so the closed caption runs below the video.
Right.
Simultaneously. It's live. It's an individual that's transcribing it. And at the end of the meeting, an individual can cut and paste that entire transcript. They can contact us and we can provide that transcript.
Okay.
So it happens in both matters.
Got you. So, okay. And it's actually on the video then, and then we would have to cut and paste it to put it together as a full transcript.
Well, it runs live the entire time.
Right.
And it's in a screen below the video if you watch our webcasting. So some people rely on that. You can go in there and you can copy and cut and paste whatever portion of the proceeding that you want. Sometimes someone might miss a meeting, they'll contact us and we'll provide that. I think the only difference between that transcript and the transcript from a court reporter is that you're not necessarily identifying every single individual. It's just the words, the spoken word.
Underneath, right. Because there's an assumption you can see who's talking.
Correct.
Okay.
I might also add to that transcripts from court reporters are probably more accurate than the ones that you get from closed captioning.
Okay, so then my other question was on closed session. For example, I have requested transcripts myself for closed session of the Pension Health Benefits Committee. I would hate to be charged for that, but so what we're saying is that you can provide transcripts, any transcripts, but I had asked specifically if we could make sure we had some, because we don't record closed session, I don't think, or do we? If,
Well, we
if we're
audio tape
transcribing them, do we?
We audio tape them. But let me be clear. I think the idea here is that CalPERS board member wants a transcript. We're going to get the transcript.
Okay.
And CalPERS is going to pay for that.
Okay.
It's, yeah, we're talking about third-party payors,
Okay.
third-party requestors.
One of our stakeholders.
Right.
Okay. I have a problem with that.
Or media, which I don't consider a stakeholder, but.
Right. Right. So, okay, so I can, for example, because it's only an audio recording, we're not seeing the person, I can request a transcript from closed session. And or if I needed to, I could request a transcript for open session. If I absolutely just, I know that person said something else and that's what I'm hearing on the audio. Let's see what the transcript says.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know that I'm entirely for this, but it sounds like we've made some, you know, it's hard to change, guys. I get why we want to do this. I do get why we want to do this. It is all out there on video. I have not taken the time to look at our video to see how easily accessible it is. And I apologize for that. I should have done that before the meeting. So I agree that this makes sense. I still have some questions, and I'm not sure that I'm in total agreement yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I agree that CalPERS needs to save money on its operations, but this is not the way to do it. I think this is a terrible idea, and we are reducing transparency. As somebody who watched 2 years worth of videos, it takes an awful long time to sit there and watch those videos and then basically wake back up and rewind and go back to where you were and to figure out what's been going on here at CalPERS. Once I found out there was transcripts, it was much faster to read the professional transcript and find out exactly who said what specifically. The problem with the closed caption is it doesn't identify who's speaking. And so in order to do that, you've got to go back and watch the videotape too. You're making it much more difficult for people who want to hold CalPERS accountable or people who just want to be informed like our stakeholders. I just think it's a terrible idea. The closed caption transcript is not good. And if you haven't sat and watched the videos, you know, you should try it. It's a lot. You cannot get informed like you can with a transcript. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ceja.
I wanted to ask and find out how many requests for transcripts, either both closed caption or non-closed caption, that CalPERS gets per month or year.
So again, Brad Pacheco, CalPERS team. For the closed caption, very little. We usually have a couple stakeholders that attend these meetings that may have missed portions of it, and we're more than happy to accommodate them. But the requests for any closed caption transcripts is minimal.
And for the regular transcripts?
For the regular transcripts, as far as public records requests, which we oversee, I would have to say maybe we get a couple of public records requests a month for transcripts. There are certainly other ways to get the transcripts other than through public records requests. So if we do get a media outlet that wants one, we provide it. But again, overall, there's not much demand for the transcripts. either closed caption or public or court reporter.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And it is
I think
possible
to
to
be-
produce a transcript, a professional transcript after the fact from the video, if a request required it.
That's correct.
Correct.
Yes, I just wanted to add that we, in addition to what Mr. Pacheco said about getting requests for the written transcripts, we will get, and I say we, I mean either the legal office or the board services unit will get, one or two, maybe on average one a month from a board member or a delegate.
Okay, thank you. That's
Madam
helpful.
Chair, could I follow up real quickly?
Yes, please, of course.
Do you have
Mr.
an estimate of the public makes a formal request were this to pass, like what CalPERS would charge a third party?
I mean, it would depend on the length of the transcript. As in my prior life as a litigator, you could order a full transcript of the entire matter. You could order the 2 pages that had the critical part that you wanted in there, and that would really be between the third party and the court reporter rather than CalPERS. I don't think CalPERS would get in the middle of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The court recorder will be recording the meetings anyway. Is that correct?
It's not the court reporter, it's Collier's actually records all of the meetings.
The transcript?
No, the closed caption is done by somebody else.
No, I'm not talking about the closed caption. I'm talking about the hard document, the
Okay.
written.
No, this item is to
He's
eliminate
taking notes over there now.
Yep.
Right.
And that's going to be done regardless of whether anyone requested, no?
No.
No?
That's what
No.
this item is to
Right.
So
end that
we
practice.
would no longer have that person,
Jim.
Jim.
the recorder, taking notes of this meeting if this was adopted.
Right. But
Okay.
that's no personal reflection on Jim.
No.
Certainly not.
No.
We love him dearly.
Yeah, and I know and he does good work for us. I know
does.
because
He does.
I've asked for copies of the transcripts that he has produced, and I'm with Ms. Brown on this because I've asked, and I know you said that board members would get it if they asked for it, and I have asked for a number of transcripts because the video is just it's too time consuming, and particularly when there's a deep discussion on an item at the investment committee, and I'm trying to run the meeting, and sometimes I forget who said what, and sometimes what was the emphasis of it, and I go back and I ask for a copy so I know how to plan going forward. And so I know that we have stakeholders that monitor our meetings very closely, and so if this is $85,000 is seem to be me a small amount for the goodwill that we will continue to receive from our stakeholders to have this available since it's being recorded anyway. So I would say that I would not support eliminating this provision.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I had a lot of questions, and I think just about all of them have been answered. And my real concern coming in was, what would be the alternative? How would we meet the needs of stakeholders, board members, et cetera? What intrigues me about the transcripts from the video and the ability to turn them into a document that we could share or even put on our website is that, versus $80,000, which isn't much, but do it for 10 years and, it starts to add up. So I guess the question I would have before I would really feel comfortable just, moving this would be, what would it take in terms of time and effort and cost to take the closed caption document, the summary of the closed caption, and make it useful to stakeholders, make it so you could scroll through it or search it or identify people where it wasn't obvious from the context of a chair saying, Now it's time for your comments, Mr. Miller, to make that useful. And would that be, I would think that would be a lot less expensive than the $80,000 a year we spend now. And it might not take much more than, a couple hours of work to have that up within a few days of a meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Miller, I think, I don't know that I would have a complete answer for you. We'd have to really talk to the vendor that does the closed captioning for us. As been noted here, it doesn't identify the person that's speaking, it's just the spoken word. So we'd have to see what it would take to go back in and actually add that and ensure that the document itself is correct, because it is simultaneously and it's live, mistakes can be made, and you see that even on closed caption with your own television. So today we pay about $2,800 a month to do the closed caption for these meetings. So it would be something on top of that cost to kind of give you a figure in comparison to what Mr. Jacobs has provided.
Yeah, because it seems like that would be a valuable addition to our website in terms of an engagement and people being able to look at that and search through it rather than having to go through the whole video, in lieu of making a request for a transcript or a PRA or a media request and then potentially getting stuck with a substantial bill as well, which would not endear us to our stakeholders.
So given that comment, which I think is a reasonable request for a little bit of additional information before making this decision, maybe I would suggest that we defer this item, that we go back, I direct the team to go back and figure that out, how the closed captioning can be converted to a useful transcript. If and what the cost might be, and because right now we have sort of three supporting or redundant services, and it might be so. But perhaps we can, if that closed captioning transcript can be converted to a useful, proper transcript, then maybe that would address a lot of the concerns that have been raised here, legitimate concerns that have been raised here today.
Yeah, we'd be happy to work with Mr. Jacobs and look at some solutions.
Okay. And do you think that that's something that's doable by, I don't know what the timing is, because I know there's
I don't think we have a meeting next month, but I don't see why we couldn't do it by May.
Okay. All right, terrific. Thank you. We do still have a few comments. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. Mr. Pacheco actually made my point for me, which is the spoken word. There are mistakes in there. It's not as bad as my texting, or it's not as bad as my iPhone when you talk into it. But there are some issues with that, and I don't know that closed captioning can go back in and fix all that without actually watching the video, which is very time consuming. And I agree, we could probably sit there and try and figure out, you might be able to figure out what they meant by that, but sometimes you can't. So, but I do appreciate you bringing up that point. And then I hope, I see you do have, we'll get to the speakers.
We will,
okay,
for
great.
sure.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Slayton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an organization which is always under significant amount of scrutiny. And some of us chafe at that, but the fact is, it's true, and in almost all cases, it's appropriate. So I just want to remind the committee, this is 1/2 millionth of our budget for this item, that $85,000. So I would just encourage the committee to put that in perspective, and if this is something that our stakeholders feel is necessary for them to do their proper oversight, then if we look at all the other money that we spend in stakeholder relations and having events and all of those things, this is a pretty minor expense. So I would encourage us to just to keep it like it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slayton. Well, that brings us to the end of the committee and the board members request to speak, but we do have several members of the public who've requested to speak. We will have these two chairs here on the left with the mics on, so if you could come down. When I call your name, please come down, take a seat, identify yourself and your affiliation for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes with which to speak. Kathy Jeppesen and Jim McRitchie are the first two on the list, and following them will be Jorge Lin and Donna Snodgrass, and then we have a few more after that.
Kathy's deferred to me to go first.
Thank
So
you.
I'm
Okay, please.
Jim McRitchie. Please consider amending Governance Committee Agenda Item 8 to continue transcripts. As a long-term member of the system and a candidate for the board on multiple occasions, former editor of PERS Watch, a member of RPEA and CSR, I've frequently found transcripts valuable in my efforts to ensure CalPERS is responsive to our members. Reducing unnecessary expenses is a positive goal, I agree with that. However, it takes much longer for stakeholders to review recordings than transcripts, has been pointed out. Eliminating transcripts may save $85,000, but it sure could end up costing stakeholders a lot more money than that. The internet publication Naked Capitalism has announced its intent to launch a transcription portal. If they can do it, I would think that CalPERS could do it, and I would think that you would prefer to read a transcript from CalPERS. I wrote these draft comments, which I supplied to the members of the committee here, by speaking to my computer, and only had to make a few minor corrections. I would think that CalPERS could use a similar process. I like Mr. Miller's idea. However, in the end, I think it was Mr. Slayton pointed out that $85,000 is relatively minor. I mean, you could go in and have the people that do the captions re-watch the video, get the speakers' names down, make corrections, but that seems like that'd be very time-consuming. So I've used transcripts when I appealed violations of law by CalPERS to the Office of Administrative Law. I've used it in preparing testimony to the California Senate on ethics violations. I used it in appealing violation of the election code by the former CalPERS board chair and the general counsel. I've used it in investigating regulations and challenging various regulations. So I can't imagine that CalPERS wants to go back to, wants to risk creating a legacy that makes it more difficult to hold current and future board members accountable. We don't want to go back to the era of Fred Bonrustro or Alfred Villalobos. Please continue generating transcripts for all CalPERS board meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McRitchie. Ms. Jefferson.
Thank you. Congratulations to the chair and the vice chair.
Thank you.
My name is Kathy Jeppesen. I am here, have been representing California Teachers Association for the last 12 years of board meetings. I am a retired emeritus professor from Cal State University, Northridge. When I come to the board meetings, when the board meetings are over, I prepare a approximately 6 to 8 page memo about what transpired during the board meetings. Before we had the video and we had the transcriptions, I would get you would send them out to the House, you would send the agenda for all of the meetings. And then on the Wednesday board meeting, I would get the committee reports so that I could compare and see what the board approved versus what had happened in the first place. What the problem is now is that the Wednesday committee reports, they're a lot less robust than they used to be in the past. And so in the past, where they would explain the salient points, now what I get is something that says committee request approval of 7A with amendments. Now that doesn't really help me in preparing this extensive report to go to CTA. Right now, I have in the back, my computer is running the Collier's transcription. They don't have the ability to go back and make changes as a final court reporter would do. And in most cases, I can use that transcription and get 90% of what I need for the report. But I can't make mistakes on that report because it goes out to 326,000 members of CTA. I know that, like, one time I was up here, I got food poisoning and couldn't physically attend the meeting, but I was able to look at that transcript and do what I needed to do in my hotel room. And my understanding is that that is not going to change. But there are many cases, and I don't think that the board realizes how many people that are back in LA or Weed or wherever in California are actually looking at those transcriptions as we speak. I would suggest that we continue the court report because every once in a while I need those to make sure that what actually transpired. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffson. Now Mr. Lin and Ms. Snodgrass, followed by Mr. Behrens and Mr. Furtado.
Good afternoon. Donna Snodgrass, Retired Public Employees Association. Just a side comment, I wonder how Jim feels about discussion about losing his job. The last 16 years of my state service was as a telecommunications systems analyst. This is what I did for 16 years. And I can tell you from experience, electronic equipment fails. Video is nice, but it cannot be depended on. The most stable platform in digital communications today are phone systems. What happened here a couple days ago? The most stable system that this building should have failed. So video is even more fragile than the phone system. Not too long ago, CalPERS made a policy to restrict public comment to 3 minutes. And now today we heard talk about doing time limits on agendas and agenda items, which is another restriction in my view. And now you're talking about doing away with a court reporter, which is a solid transcript and much more accurate than anything else that's been discussed today. You know, individually, each of these actions may be brushed aside and said, oh, let's move forward, let's think forward. But when I step back and look at the whole picture, I get the impression that public comment is not viewed favorably, and there's an effort to try and stop a little more input than what's been going on. And with these discussions that's happened today, it doesn't surprise me at all that the members of CalPERS are losing confidence in the system for more than one reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Snodgrass. Mr. Lin.
Committee chair, committee members, other board members, I'm going to speak a little different than what you've heard before. Last week was Sunshine Week. This week, we seem to have shut that door. I'm confused. I think that we need to keep what we have because it is a valuable tool not only for we stakeholders, but for you members of the board who may need to go back and look at see what happened 3 months ago on a particular item. the ability to do word search on the transcriptions is something you cannot do adequately on the closed caption. The closed caption, you'll be lucky if you hit 25% of the words correctly. I don't know how many of you pick up the phone and call one of your credit card companies or those kinds of things that are doing the voice recognition, and then you're trying to get into where you want to get to, and the voice doesn't understand you. The same thing is true on closed captions. So I think that we're going down a road that, you know, for $85,000, I don't know whose budget this $85,000 comes out of. If it comes out of the legal department's budget, it would be interesting to do a budget review, zero-based budgeting. That's what I used to do thousands of years ago because I'm an old man. And I think that, $85,000, I could find $85,000 many times in the budget at CalPERS. I think it is not the thing to do is to eliminate something that we stakeholders and you board members have as a benefit to provide you with the information so that you can come and make informed decisions, and we as stakeholders can come and speak intelligently. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Behrens and Mr. Furtado, please, and then followed that by Jerry Fountain and Jackie Lee.
Madam Chair, committee members, Tim Behrens, California State retirees. I'll keep this short because it's late in the day and I want to go have a glass of wine. A bad idea. $85,000 is a sneeze for this organization. There have to be, as the last speaker stated, there has to be other operational expenses at CalPERS that would come way before this idea. When one of the board members asked the staff, can I continue to get a transcript, the answer was yes, no problem at all. Well, I want to hear the same thing for stakeholders, okay? I want to hear the staff say, okay, Tim, you want to keep on getting that transcript? Not a problem, and guess what? We're not even going to charge you for it. Because it sounded like that was one of the things that was indicated by one of the speakers earlier, that we were going to be charged for the transcript. So I would urge this committee to kill this idea. If you don't do it today, do it tomorrow. Let's get on with the business of looking out for the stakeholders, which is your job, making sure that our pensions continue to come in every month, and don't rob us from the information that we need in order to hold you accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Furtado.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, the rest of your committee. I'm Ron Furtado. I represent the Riverside Sheriff's Association, and I represent over 4,000 brave men and women in law enforcement. As an elected rep, much like yourself, I understand the importance of transparency and accountability. In addition, I also work for a prosecutor's office. I understand that the transcripts are the gold standard in accountability and transparency. It clearly indicates a record of who said it and why they said it. It memorializes that record indefinitely. It's also used for any appeals or any scrutiny that takes place. The optics of the discontinuing of the transcripts is horrible. It's a bad idea. I've heard over the last day and almost 2 days about CalPERS being the leadership role in everything. Let's continue to be a leadership role in accountability and transparency, and continue the use of the gold standard of transcripts. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jerry Fountain and Jackie Lee, you're up next. Please proceed when you're ready, Mr. Fountain. Go ahead.
I'm Jerry Fontaine. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for CSR. So numbers are my forte. We looked at the numbers here and talked about $85,000, but there's also a statement in there that indicates it's probably less. So let's hypothetically, let's say $60,000. Now the proposal that Mr. Miller suggested, which was a sound proposal, but in order to put that into play, it's going to cost money. And we're looking, I would say respectively, at least $20,000. So there goes another $20,000 in your savings. Now we're down to $40,000. Mentioned also that the board, for some special occasions, could request a transcript. There's a cost there, so now our savings could be down to $15,000. For the $15,000 savings, you've heard from previous speakers talk about the unreliability of the system, the difficulties in getting accurate information off of the videos and things of that nature. It's not worth the savings of that small amount of money. So I strongly recommend that you keep in place what you have. On a previous agenda item, it was discussed that let's not reinvent the wheel. The suggestion made by Mr. Miller was reinventing the wheel for something you already have, and at a very small cost. So I would suggest or recommend that you keep the transcripts in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lee.
Hello, my name is Jackie Lee, and I'm a CTA liaison here at CalPERS, and I'm also a classified employee of Culver City Unified School District. I'm an administrative assistant, and I know the value of having your documentation. Although we're always going towards paperless, I have to tell you how many times it has come down to having something pre-recorded and then something. So I just wanted to mention that closed captioning is not always accurate. You've heard that before. Sometimes the name of a person becomes garbled, and what I understood, Brad Pacheco and his staff have been very helpful to me on many occasions when I needed something. One of the things about closed captioning, when it is recorded, it's done simultaneously with the video. The moment this is off, when your meeting is over, it disappears. If I have not captured it because there's a delay in Wi-Fi or something like that, then I have to call. And although I like to be independent, so I would like to go ahead and do it on my own. But again, your staff is gracious, and so it's not all available after the meetings. Transcripts accuracy, do not give you the name of the board member. And if you are new to this place, you really need to go ahead and know who the players are. If you rewind the video and you watch it, it does not have closed captioning at that time either. And so, it's not helpful. It might not be requested often, but as I said before, documentation is very important, and when you have someone who has done this for years and knows the players, it's really important that you get this information. From Collier's, it says that I've been told that it's basically the data is raw, and because it's basically a voice-to-text automatic function, it just doesn't do the work that it's needed. Ms. Jepson, who has spoken earlier, has stated that the transcript on the Collier did not pick up most of her things, perhaps because she's soft-spoken, but it did not do the things. And I just basically believe that it does not meet the requirements, the transcript requirements, and I do believe that, keeping this position would be beneficial for recording purposes, and also for, as Mr. Furtado spoke, for legal documentation as well. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. Well, that brings us to the end of the list of public speakers. Mr. Woodson, you're not on my list, but please.
I submitted a speaker's card back there.
Sorry, please come forward. Thank you for standing up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Larry Woodson, California State Retirees. I appreciate very much now the opportunity to comment. I've been making notes, and so I've revised my comments, so I'm trying not to repeat things that other people have said, but I'll start out by saying, in the spirit of sunshine and transparency, I too urge the board to reject elimination of the transcripts. I think it's noteworthy that the staff analysis solely addressed the board and staff use of transcripts and nowhere mentioned stakeholder use of transcripts, and you've since heard the importance of them to us. Also, regarding questions from the board to Mr. Pacheco about how many requests per month you get, I'd also like to remind him and that his very proactive stakeholder relations group monthly sends copies of the transcripts by e-link to California State retirees and many of the other stakeholder groups, and I imagine dozens of individuals. So that's already in place, and we very much appreciate it. I, of course, don't read every one, but I do when I need to. And that's a very simple transmission to a lot of people at no cost, really. I mean, at very little cost. And so it is very useful, time-saving for us to use transcripts over the videos, although the videos are very important in their own right. Many state agencies and departments are legally required to provide written transcripts of their public hearings, verbatim, and legislators obviously recognize the importance of transcripts for public agencies. I used to work for a public agency and was a contract administrator for a court reporter contract. So I have some personal experience with this, and one of the things we found is that there were some occasions where we did an audio recording and tried to get our staff to transcribe it. It was nowhere near the same quality. Court reporters are professionals, and they do a good job. These closed caption transcripts are nowhere near the equivalent. So in closing, I would ask you to continue using or doing the transcripts as they are, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Woodson, and thank you to all the commenters. Ms. Taylor, back to you.
Just a quick question. I wasn't, well, a quick question and perhaps a motion. You would ask to send it back for more information? The item?
That was
the agenda item?
Yes, to defer the item and do a little more research.
On what exactly? I'm sorry. I didn't write it down.
It was, the direction was to look into how can we use the closed captioning transcripts and convert those to useful transcripts to be provided to anyone who would so request them.
So I think we heard a lot of people on this, and so I would like to make a motion to reject the staff's recommendation.
Second.
Motion's been made.
Can I speak to this?
Yes, please.
Just to be clear, it's not a staff recommendation. This was brought to us. We were asked to bring it forward, which we did, and that's fine.
I'm sorry, I can restate the motion.
Well, no, I just wanted to be clear that, I mean, this is a good example of the way the process is supposed to work. We brought a concept forward, and we researched it, and it was debated, and we heard from the stakeholders, which is all great, and it's to the committee to decide whether to go forward or not.
So okay. I will make a motion to reject the termination of the current practice of engaging a court reporter for and ordering transcriptions of all board and committee meetings.
And I will second that motion.
Okay, the motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Slayton.
Yeah, I would just ask the maker of the motion and the second just to turn it into a positive motion. Yeah, that the motion would be, to retain the current process of court
Yeah.
reporting.
Friendly amendment.
Well, I'm not a committee member.
So just to restate the motion, if I may, Ms. Taylor, to continue, the motion is to continue the current practice of engaging a court reporter for and ordering transcriptions of all board and committee meetings. That is the motion? Okay, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. I think somebody thought he was on the committee. Well, that was a good, robust discussion. Okay, that brings us to agenda item number 9, which is the policy to require board member use of a views expressed disclaimer. Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, and this is an information item, and it's just as the chair stated, it's a discussion on whether to add a requirement to the board governance policy that when speaking at conferences and the like, board members expressly disclaim that they're speaking on behalf of CalPERS. This is the sort of thing that's commonly used, as stated in the report, by the SEC and other government agencies. So again, it's for the committee's discussion.
So this is an item that I raised when I was a member of the committee and not the chair of the committee, and I think this is common practice for commissions, federal entities, state entities, that when someone representing that entity is speaking outside of the entity, then they express that the views expressed are their own and not necessarily those of their organization. And I think that is a good common practice, because sometimes any one of us who's speaking might mix both sort of the formal policies and strategies of the organization with our own views about certain aspects of the organization. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Slayton. You had a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is appropriate to do, to follow the guidelines that other agencies use, so I think it's very appropriate. I would just suggest that the committee consider, and some people may feel differently about this, but I think there's a difference between speaking to stakeholder groups and when board members are speaking before a national or an international audience where press is there. And right now we have no procedure for approving that to occur. And I think that's missing from our governance policy. So I would ask the chair to consider, the committee to consider discussing that, maybe at a future meeting. Doesn't have to be today. But consider, should there be some kind of approval process for speaking to a national or international audience? Because even though you can give a disclaimer, the fact is the reason you're there is because you're a CalPERS board member. And so people will tend to kind of pass by that, and 20 minutes into the presentation, they've forgotten that you did the disclaimer, and you're being quoted. So I would add that suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hollinger.
Yeah, maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought when we do speak, I know at least for myself, I go through Karen or the board office, and I have the content of, I submit to them what I've been asked to speak about, and then get the content basically from board staff or whatever resources they're using. I thought I was following a procedure. If that's not.
No, that is a.
Yeah, so I thought we do have a procedure. Am I mistaken?
So okay.
Just clarification, I'm asking.
Well, I think the distinction is that there's a process. There is the process that Ms. Mather just spoke of for getting help on your talking points. But what I think Mr. Slayton is saying is that there should be an approval process before you go to that step of seeking team help for that talk. Did I get that right?
So I think that's something we could put on the parking lot.
Sure.
Ms. Taylor.
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to accept that the committee members, basically the agenda item, that we have a, what do you call it, a
Views expressed disclaimer.
views expressed disclaimer on behalf of CalPERS.
So the language of that views expressed disclaimer would be, the views expressed are my own and do not necessarily represent the views of CalPERS?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and that board members, when they're speaking publicly, would use that disclaimer?
We'll use that disclaimer, and that's the motion that I'd like to
That's the
make.
policy. Okay, thank you. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. On the motion. Anything else on the, okay, on the motion? Mr. LaFaso.
Not exactly to the motion, just to clarify, I just want to say that when we talk about approval thing, an approval policy, I know that's sort of not today's motion or action, but I mean, it is a fact that if the controller appears at an event with a national or international audience, the controller is there because she's the elected state controller of California, not necessarily because she's there as a member of the CalPERS board. I don't see any problem if her comments or her statements aren't adopted as CalPERS board policy to disclaim, but as it relates to, why somebody is where they are, I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so, I'm sorry, where
So
were
there's
we?
a motion before us to adopt a policy requiring board members to use the views expressed disclaimer in any remarks that they make publicly, outside of the boardroom.
And I second.
And the motion was made by Ms. Taylor and seconded by Ms. Hollinger. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
This, just for
Yes.
clarification, would be, since it's an information item, it could be acted on, but what I would suggest is that you direct me to bring back the precise language that we would insert into the board governance policy to reflect Ms. Taylor's motion. And again, just as we did with the other item, we can put it on the consent calendar if somebody wants to pull it off because they don't like the language. We can do that.
Thank you.
So does
Ms.
that mean
Taylor?
we still vote on the motion as is right now, and then you bring the language back? Or do we change the
Or
motion?
do we just,
You
or
can,
maybe
you can do that. I think you changed the motion to be more of an intent motion. It is the intent of the committee to insert or to adopt a views expressed requirement for board members
Okay,
when speaking at conferences, et cetera,
okay.
and that staff bring back the precise language.
Okay, so I'll make a motion, I'll rescind my previous motion. I will make a motion to have the staff bring back language that will reflect our views expressed disclaimer language that we can consider at a future board governance meeting.
to incorporate into the board governance
Yeah.
policy? Okay, terrific. So motion's been made and seconded. Is the motion clear to everyone? Yes. Okay. Seeing no further requests to speak, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. That brings us to agenda item, and I had no request from the public to speak on that item. That brings us to agenda item number 10, summary of committee direction. Mr. Jacobs.
Okay. Bear with me on
I
this
know
one.
there was a lot today.
On agenda item 6, there's two things to do. One is to bring it back with the precise language to reflect the comments that were made on 5D on page 13 of 25 of attachment 1 regarding adding, well, there was some specific proposed language that we'll bring back along with C and E.
Right. That the committee members would speak before other board members present.
Correct.
Yep.
There was the process of putting an item on the agenda
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yes, there was, sorry, we also, yes, thank you. We also, sorry, there was also the direction around a review of the governance policy
Right.
and any policy where there was not already an existing process or procedure supporting that policy.
Right, thank you.
Put on an agenda.
Yes. And then with respect to agenda item 7, we are going to further look at enshrining in the board governance policy a process for investigating allegations of sexual harassment, et cetera, making a determination, and potential censures.
Yes. And I think the direction, oh, yes, there was direction about chair training, that we would work to get, we would work on developing a chair training. Thank you for capturing all of that, Ms. Hollinger.
And then on item 9, we're going to bring back the precise language to insert into the board governance policy that would require board members to disclaim that the views, that they're not
Views
speaking on
expressed
behalf
disclaimer.
of CalPERS when they speak
Yes.
at conferences and the like.
Okay, so that was.
I think that's it.
I think that. And then we put it on the,
Parking lot.
Put on the parking lot, the item around approval of requests to speak
Right.
at.
Right. I better get a
external
transcript of all this.
I know, right?
Okay.
Thank goodness we have one.
Okay. I think we have captured now all the summary of committee direction. Is there anything else that committee members recall that we did not capture? Okay. Then that brings us to agenda item number 11, which is public comment. I have no further requests to speak, but is there any member of the public who wishes to speak at this time? Seeing none, we are adjourned.